I remember a few years ago when I first saw hundreds of people camping and demonstrating in the streets of my city. Actually, I paid little attention to the claims, but little did I know that these angry but at the same time peaceful demonstrations had something related with something rather global. I didn't actually get how the protests in Barcelona could change anything at all, and even more related to the political life of my city. So recently, I've seen more and more demonstrations and even participating in some of them, even more taking into account the situation of my country. And I've seen that we actually do have an impact on this political life. It is a fact that the second half of the 200s have seen a rise in the number of global protests. Not only in the terms of the massive representation of the civil society during the events, but also in the frequency of the protests. So nowadays we need to picture demonstrations as mobilizations that gather thousands of people and that last several days or can be repeated often depending on the issue of the protest, and that can have an impact of the political life of the country. Nowadays many protests seem to appear from nowhere without any kind of political structure that determines the leadership or the hierarchical form of the movement. Like if hundreds of people were gathered out of the blue to protest for a common cause in a single space. That's the same impression I just got when I first saw the protesters in 2011 in Barcelona. This breaks with the traditional political grouping and ideologies is sometimes related to the role of communication on social media. So mass media platforms such as Twitter or Facebook have given the protests new shapes, and it is relatively easy to share any idea in a tweet, knowing that it can reach citizens in the other side of the world in a matter of seconds and can completely change their minds, foster dialogues, or even incentive similar protests. When it comes to the trigger of these protests, factors diverge, and triggers can be divided into some specific but simple categories at the same time, despite their complexity. Some are basically political, so protesting against the extension of a presidential mandate or the unfair result of an elections. Some others can be rather economic, like for example claiming about inequalities or unfair distribution of wages, for example, and so on. And some others can be social, so claiming for a better monitoring of human rights or tackling the situation in the public sphere, like education or health policies. Recently, in addition to that, we can remark that these protests have become more country-specific, denouncing the socio-economic and political situation of the states rather than focusing on big issues. It is therefore more likely to see that the citizens protest against corruption in their country rather to protest against climate change, for example. Despite the fact that we used to see massive demonstrations on the 20th century and the beginning of the 2000s, today's protests are rather local. In this case, we see how citizens demonstrate the situation in the states, what happened as it happened in Barcelona, for example, taking into account the situation within their boundaries. Citizens therefore see local problems are more feasible to change. It is more likely that a massive demonstration can change the political life in a country or even in a city, rather than to stop, for example, a global war. So we must take into account communication as well, as we were saying, as a principal tool of the current protest. As we said, these mass media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, or even Instagram, give movements a new shape, and they help to create channels of communication. They organize events, they share logistical information, they capture and share these visual evidences, and they even raise global awareness about these demonstrations. So we can see that the internet has completely changed the rules of the game. And if one civil society has to organize these massive meetings in order to communicate to the people how demonstrations were going to be, now Twitter can do it in less than 140 characters and say there's going to be a demonstration about this issue in this place at this time. And anyone with a smartphone can even be aware of this and even participate. So we can take into account as well that this is not only applicable in the local scale, because this message will be public and can be read worldwide. So we must consider as well that these protests are, as we said, local, but also global at the same time. So population in other countries can be identified with others' common cause and initiate similar protests. This is what happened, for example, in 2011, what started in Madrid as the 15M movement in May, and 5 months after, in October, they had created similar protests worldwide. So all protests were mainly local, so every city was organizing these non-violent events in order to demonstrate and complain about the political and socio-economic establishment. But all the demonstrations were repeated and were similar. But why? What if some activists denounce in Madrid the political situation in Spain, and the result ends up in a massive demonstration with more than 500,000 people involved in the streets? And what if all this population involved is using mass media to make the situation public to the world, in addition to all the traditional media covering? So the protests are therefore likely to be here in other cities, like for example Barcelona, as it was my case, and people are also likely to start similar protests, questioning their own administrations, creating huge spread of ideas and values that will empower this movement worldwide. So we can hence see what started in Madrid created this effect, these demonstrations that spread around Europe and the United States, and even reaching countries like Japan, New Zealand, Peru, or even South Africa in the other side of the world, for example. So therefore, what started to complain us against a specific administration ended up as a global movement against the whole political status, which questioned the basis of democracy and political establishment in more than 1,000 cities in 82 countries. So the current protests are not only, let's see, the form of new organization and new demonstration, but also a new form of politics itself. The global spread of protests reflects a fundamental shift in the relation between citizens and government, and a new form of monetary democracy is being formed. So while citizens vote in the elections, the government can act according to the votes, and citizens have a stronger voice in case these governments are not representing them well. So meaning that the population is more likely to protest and be against those that were supposed to represent them, but are not representing them well. So, in other words, movements do not object to the principle of representative democracy itself, but denounce this practice of such a democracy as it is today, and do not recognize its legitimacy. So in any case, we can talk about both success and failure when it comes to the outcome of this global protest. On one hand, we can see that population gained this anti-systemic energy and autonomy, being more likely to protest against any injustice. So people is aware that they have power in their hands, and their protests are going to be heard, and they have power enough to change a bit these political establishments. So mainly they can contribute on setting the political agendas, for example. In many cases, global protests have been translated into political parties that have been used this power of the protest to change the system from inside, like it could be the case of the Spanish Podemos or the Greek Syriza. Nonetheless, on the other hand, we can take into account that these protests have taken place in non-democratic countries, which has been more difficult for activists to find a benefit in the political life, as it could be, for example, the case of the Arab Spring, in which the protest ended up as a strengthening rule of the already previous authoritarian regime and intervention of some other countries, even the rise of terrorist groups taking into account and taking advantage of the legal power vacuum. So we can see that these protests can have both negative and positive impact. We see how what started as a simple protest against any established or mechanism used by the regime can completely end up dismantling the known political institutions, or at least change or modify them. So nowadays, protests seems to be more frequent, with influencing each other and more easily, and working like an echo due to this the role of the mass media covering. So even though many will question that the global protests may not have this powerful voice, and they haven't improved the situation in many countries, and it could be the example of the Arab Spring, we can see that despite they haven't reached their goal, they might have an impact, and they actually have changed the political establishment. So while some argue that contemporary protests are about tearing down structures of power and about sustained political change, we must remark that the fact that none of the political situations is the same as it was before these protests. So this could be considered as a success by itself. So either improving the situation of the previous regime or not, protests may have improved to have this impact and have a powerful voice and be proved to be an actor for global governance. Thank you very much.